This video contains every theory that I've gone over for Doors Floor 2. Feel free to talk with each other in the comments about your own theories. And if you want to help out the channel and its growth, leaving the video to play in the background while you do some chores, homework, or while you go to sleep will be greatly appreciated. But with all of that being said, enjoy every theory of Doors Floor 2. Seek. We've seen him 6 times in game. The first 4 was him chasing us, the 5th was his boss fight, and the 6th was at the end of Floor 2 when he took over the Queen. Wait, took over? That's a weird detail for the devs to add. It's almost like they're showing more and more of what Seek can really do. It's almost like they're telling us that Seek is the true villain of Doors. Let's start off with his ability to corrupt. We see in Floor 1 that he is able to morph and change his environment with a seemingly infinite supply of black goo. We see this before the chase scenes in the form of eyes watching us, during the chase scenes in the form of hands grabbing out to get us, and in the screeches we see throughout Floor 1 and 2. When Floor 1 released, it was speculated that screeches were just mini Seeks, but now we know that they're Seek's corrupted giggles from Floor 2. This is because screeches, although almost completely covered in goo, still show the giggles' teeth, lips, and tentacles coming out. But what's interesting about the screeches is that it seems like Seek completely changed their physiology along with their basic functions. And examples of this would be how screeches make a screech noise and giggles make a laughing noise. This sounds like a small change, but because of how small their bodies are, the only way Seek could have done this is by changing giggles' vocal cords and possibly their left hemisphere of their brain that controls speech by corrupting them. Beyond this, it seems like Seek added 2 extra tentacles on the screeches and improved their eyesight to help them latch on and attack us quicker. However, this begs the question of why the giggles? Why doesn't Seek just take out the Queen first if he has the power to completely change how entities function? Well, it seems like Seek is just as limited as characters like the Figure or the Grumble Queen. This is because we know that Guiding Light can only seal him off for a bit but cannot straight up kill him like how he does with the Figure or the Grumbles. However, even though Seek's power is limited, if Seek can surprise an entity like Queen Grumble, he can easily take over the entity, no matter how powerful they are. From all of this, we can determine that Seek is extremely powerful and can take over any entity that he comes into contact with. This could also mean that the snake we see at the end of the Seek boss fight could have also been an entity that we will see in a later floor, judging by the fact the snake wasn't a direct copy of Seek's tentacles or hands. And it would also mean that, like Screech, we will see Queen Grumble become something like Queen Scream in Floor 3, which will probably replace at least one of the regular Seek chase scenes. But what does all of this mean? Well, judging by how Seek runs at everything he wants to corrupt, it seems like Seek is very specifically wanting to corrupt us. But why? We aren't nearly as strong as something like Queen Grumble, and we definitely aren't as strong as the Figure. Well, it actually can all be explained with the 3 architects. Let me explain. First, we have Guiding Light, who we know is on our side. We all know that Guiding Light takes a favor to us, so he illuminates places we need to go with blue sparkles, and he also takes the form of a crescent moon when we die or when we exorcise an entity, just like the moon we see in the 3 lights picture. But you might be asking, why does Seek care about the Guiding Light? Seek can't corrupt him, and he certainly can't surpass him in power. Well, to explain this, we will have to look at the PC and console versions of the game where Seek has a red light around him. Now, the problem with this is that we only see different colored lights when we see either Guiding Light or Curious Light when they take the form of 2 of the 3 architects in the picture, making the red light that is around Seek the 3rd architect that we haven't interacted with yet. Now, this could just be a design choice, but if it was, then why does it only come from Seek and not entities like the Figure or Queen Grumble? And besides that, why haven't we directly interacted with the red architect? Wouldn't the back doors be fitting place for it compared to Curious Light? It just seems to out of place for the red light around Seek to just be a random design choice to make him seem more dangerous. Now, if this red light is the red architect, then that would mean that the red architect is actively working against us and Guiding Light because it is guiding Seek to specifically chase us. From this, we can determine that the red architect is very similar to Guiding Light, but instead of helping us, she helps Seek specifically. Now, this seems very random. Why Seek? And past that, why did Guiding Light choose us and not Seek? And why does the red architect want to corrupt us so badly? Well, let's start with why she chose Seek. As previously mentioned, Seek can corrupt all entities indoors if he has perfect timing, like how he did with Queen Grumble, who he caught outside of the mines. We also know that Seek is much bigger than we originally thought, and his true mass is unknown. Although we drained a large portion of him in the Seek boss fight, we still know that there is clearly more Seek goo because we see him in the next scene. This means that Seek is not only one of the most powerful entities, but also has a large amount amount of mass spread across the factory, giving the Red Architect a lot more ground compared to an entity like the figure. Now we have why Seek was chosen. Let's cover why we are chosen. We know that the player stumbled across the hotel during an investigation that resulted in us being forced to go through hundreds of doors to escape. But why are we able to escape? We know that all of the other entities cannot escape, so why us? Well, it could have to do with the fact that we're human and not bound to the floors like how the entities are. With this, we can actually find out why Guiding Light chose us. It seems like Guiding Light wants us to escape doors because he is afraid of the Red Architect getting out. Now you might be asking, why hasn't the Red Architect gotten out already? Well, notice something with me real quick. We don't see many particles coming from Seek. We only see a red light illuminating his surroundings. This might be a stretch, but I think that the Red Architect is actually inside of Seek and chose him specifically to have a chance to get out of doors by trying to corrupt us. From this, we can also determine that the architects are not able to escape doors by the means of their own, but they need to be in a human to escape. This is because we know that if the Red Architect could escape, they would have by now. We also know that their power is very limited. They can only guide us and entities, but they can never just take anything out of the doors. Now back to Guiding Light. From this newfound information, we can determine that the reason why he guides us is to prevent the Red Architect from escaping with Seek and causing havoc on Earth. We know that Guiding Light can't just take us out the way he came, so he is doing the most he can by guiding us towards the exit and away from Red Architect specifically. So now that we have Guiding Light, Red Light, and Seek figured out, let's cover the one character that's intentions are unknown, Curious Light. We know that from the painting, Curious Light is in the middle of Red Light and Guiding Light, which would mean that he is also morally in the middle of the two, neither with us nor against us. But wait, if Guiding Light is helping us and Red Light is trying to kill us, then why does Curious Light even bother to help us? Well, it's very simple, because Curious Light is in the middle of these two, neither with or against us. He balances it out with various things. One of these things is the vagueness he portrays in the secret rooms, and another shocking way he does this is by helping the figure. To explain this, let's look back at when the game first came out. The figure didn't have the big spotlight he has now. He was just a strictly hearing-based entity. But after Guiding Light was introduced, the figure got a large update with a new addition, a big yellow gleaming spotlight, just like the yellow light we see in the rooms. So, with all of this, we can determine what will happen in the next floors of doors. We know that Seek and the Red Architect will continue trying to corrupt us the more we go through outdoors, and his attempts will become more and more complicated as we go. The more complicated they get, the more corrupted entities we're going to see try to chase us down. These entities will be Queen Screech, the snake thing in the Seek boss fight, and whatever he corrupts next in the next 8 floors of doors. Speaking about the next 8 floors, we know that as soon as floor 3 starts Queen Scream and her minions will be chasing us down throughout the floor, more than likely in a new boss fight or a longer Seek chase. After floor 3, we know that we most likely will get a water-based floor like the pool rooms because of the drain and sea snake in floor 2, hinting at a level similar to pressure. Throughout these levels, we know that Guiding Light will continue to guide us and might even reveal to us why specifically he's guiding us in later floors. After Guiding Light, we have Curious Light, who will continue to be unbiased and will casually help us while also helping the figure, not taking a side and just observing the other two architects fight it out. And maybe in floor 3 we might even find out where the figure came from, like how we saw where the screeches come from in floor 2. All of this will eventually end, however, with us escaping doors and never turning back. The castle. We see it at the end of floor 2, and we can only assume it's where floor 3 will be. But even though we don't know much about the castle, I found out exactly what doors floor 3 will be like by the leaks and hints given to us in floor 2. Let's start off with what we were just left off with in floor 2. At the end of floor 2, we explore a forest that leads us towards a big medieval castle that has the same architecture as a castle from the Middle Ages. There are a few really important details about the castle, the first being the layers that we see on the inside of it. It looks like the castle has 2 large layers that eventually lead to the middle, which is where I'm presuming we need to go in order to get to floor 4. The first layer that we entered at the end of floor 2 will be a very large courtyard that will lead us to the first layer of castle walls that we will be exploring. Layer 1 will most likely keep the entities simple with a few additions. These additions might include the vine we see El Goblino talk bad about in floor 2, which is also on the outside of the castle. I mention El Goblino because in floor 1 he didn't talk about the vines, but in floor 2 he did, most likely hinting at the vines being in floor 3. The vine, I'm guessing, will work as a multi-role entity that will do things like block certain doorways or entryways, chase us down and put us on a time limit, or force us to go a certain direction in the courtyards. I'm also guessing the vine will make other entities like flower entities that will serve a similar role to Giggles in floor 2. I'm guessing this flower entity would be blooming on the vines and will make stretching noises to where it's at to avoid its attack. However, I'm guessing the flower entity will attack horizontally instead of vertically like the Giggles, making us have to change our playstyle a bit to avoid them. Talking about the vine, we know that because we're entering a courtyard, we will most likely be using the shears that were added in floor 1. From my guess, we will use the shears as a limited use counter to the vines in floor 3. Now that the courtyard is out of the way, let's go to the actual rooms themselves. From the medieval theme, we can assume that the rooms will be like how Elden Ring rooms are, with large paintings, tables, and suits of armor across the floors. The lockers for floor 3 will most likely be the suits of armor that we will crawl inside of to hide from Rush and other entities. But because they're suits of armor and not regular lockers, so I'm guessing they will have a similar mechanic to the puddles of void mass and pressure, where certain armors will have glowing eyeballs inside and will kill us if we try to go inside of them. But one thing that the suits of armor will also have are swords, which might become a new mechanic in floor 3. I doubt that we can fight off monsters like Rush or Seek, but the swords can probably be used to destroy glowbat nests, and also weaker entities like Screech. But besides all of this, we know that floor 3 layer 1 will keep the same basic entities like Rush and Screech from floor 1, and will add on the glowbats and now corrupted Grumbles from floor 2, all whilst adding the vines, the flower buds, and the suits of armor. So this leads us to the first Seek chase in floor 3, which I'm guessing will actually be completely different than the other ones because of the leaked horse entity. I say this because it seems really strange that the devs would just add a random horse unless it is used for jousting. That's right, I think that we will be running away from Seek all while jousting him in floor 3. Now you might be asking, what will his ride be? Well, from my best guess, it will be the now corrupted Queen Grumble that we know is just fast enough for jousting. And the part that ties this all together is the Black Knight versus the White Knight story from the Middle Ages, which we know the game, and specifically floor 3, already takes heavy inspiration from. Seek, as we all know, is black, so he will be the Black Knight, possibly forming a coat of armor around him, and we will be the White Knight, wearing a basic suit of armor like the ones we will use as lockers. With this, from my guess, the jousting will occur in an outside portion of layer 1 in the courthouse on the other side of the vines that we will see when we first walk into floor 3. We will most likely joust around the entire left, back, and right side of layer 1's courtyards until we escape through a large door that guiding light will block. Now with all of this, we know what will happen in layer 1, so let's cover layer 2. The halfway point separator of layer 1 and layer 2, from my best guess, will be a corn or hayfield type area because of the leaked entity known as the Groundskeeper. The Groundskeeper seems like a similar entity to how the figure is in floor 1, where he will go off of sound, and what's directly infant of him to find us. From his basic design, we can see that he is a ghost-like entity that looks like a farmer Grim Reaper almost. From my guess, he will work similar to how Zardy is in his game, where he will hunt us down while we are trying to get through a corn maze of sorts, while also using stronger versions of the mechanics that the figure uses. From my guess, we will hide in the corn to get away from him, and if he sees us, we will be chased until we get to a suit of armor. I'm guessing the puzzle that we will see in his maze will be a position puzzle where we will arrange certain objects in a certain position to unlock the door. From my guess, these objects will be things like suits of armor and statues or pumpkins with certain faces on them. Either way, this all would make this level 50 the hardest one yet, that will actually be fair, unlike the level 50 in floor 2, but will require more brain power than the one in floor 1. After we complete this puzzle, we will enter into layer 2 of the castle, which from my guess will be similar to the last levels of the hotel, but with a very large twist with there being kid versions of the figure. Let me explain. At the end of floor, 2 people glitched through the courtyard doors to find this weird flesh puddle. Now this is a very weird addition to floor 2, especially when you realize that the only remotely fleshy things we see are the Grumbles and the figure. We know that this flesh cannot be the Grumbles because they were corrupted by Seek, so that means they have to be from the figure. Now I know this seems like big stretch because so far we have had no indication of the figure not being like Seek, where there are no kid versions and it's just him. That's what I said until I came across this leaked image. Now at first you might say that this guy looks like the Groundskeeper. I mean, he has the hat and the arms to prove it. But I have a theory that the Groundskeeper actually raises and grows these these guys to create figures. Now again, I know that this sounds like a stretch, but this actually makes sense in Doors lore. We know the figure came from somewhere because he looks organic. He isn't like the PNGs because they take human-like forms with 3D models. And he isn't like Grumbles because he doesn't stay with other more larger versions of himself. All of this marks out the possibilities that the figure comes directly from the architects or from reproduction. This to me leads us to the most likely possibility of the groundskeeper growing the figures in his garden/cornfield that he protects. This would not only make sense, but also fit with the theme of plant life in floor 3. So with this, we know that these whole guys will be patrolling layer 2, like how the figure does. From my guess, because they are kid versions, they will be much weaker and won't be able to see at all of here nearly as good. These whole guys, from my guess, will be scattered throughout the doors, similar to how the giggles are in floor 2. We will most likely have to lead them away or pay attention to their tracking to get past them and move to the next doors. So, with the main new entity of door 250 and above figured out, from my guess, we will have another jousting match with Seek that will end up with us in the final boss room in the middle of the castle. Now, I think that the final boss will be a king, because in the middle of the castles there is a throne room, and past that there doesn't seem like there's anywhere else to go in the castle besides the middle. From my guess, we will fight him by one of two things. One, which is the less likely option, where we are challenged by the king to a duel of which we will fight with the sword mechanic that I previously mentioned. This will eventually lead us to kill the king and escape the kid figures by going into floor 4. And 2, we will hide from the king and we'll have to sneak around the throne room to do a puzzle that will result in us killing him, again leading us into floor 4. From my guess, floor 4 will be a sewer-themed floor. This is because of, again, two things. One, in the Seek boss fight, we see that Seek's main body went down a drain of some sorts that will lead to a sewers-type area. And 2, we also see in the Seek boss fight a water snake-like creature that Seek has possessed, which also seems to hint at an underwater sewers-type area. From my guess, floor 4 will be similar to Pressure in the extent of us being surrounded by liquids in large industrialized rooms. However, the main difference will be the fact that we will be exploring a sewer and not an underground facility. From my guess, this sewer floor will focus on Seek like how floor 3 focused on the figure. We will most likely see where Seek came from, and we might even get more architect lore from how the red architect possessed Seek. The 3 architects. We used to only know that they made the floors and the entities, but after the floor 2 update, I did some digging and found out what all 3 will do, and even how the game will end with them all trying to kill us. Let's start with Guiding Light. From what we know, Guiding Light is on our side and is trying his best to guide us through the doors to help us escape. We know that his power is limited, however, because he can't just kill entities forever, and he also can't just take us out of doors to prevent us from constantly dying. We also know that the other lights can limit his power, because when modifiers are on, and when we are in pocket dimensions, he isn't present and is unable to guide us, which is why we see Curious Light instead of him. We also know that his power has to be channeled through objects like the crucifix to kill entities temporarily. However, even with his maximum power, we know that when we try to crucify a big entity like Seek or the figure, they are broken free by Mischievous Light because the blue sigil turns red and breaks. But this begs the question, why is Guiding Light's power limited by the other architects? Is it because he helps us and try to prevent us from repeatedly dying to the same entities? That's what I thought at first, until I looked back at the statue of Guiding Light in the courtyard. The angel that this statue represents is an archangel. Archangels are mostly depicted as guardians, messengers, and guides, which perfectly portray who Guiding Light is. Guiding Light is like our guardian archangel, guiding us throughout the game to help us progress, protecting us from Seek and the figure through blocking doors, and giving us messages after we die on how to get past the entities. Not just this, but underneath the statue of Guiding Light, there is a coded message that says Limbo. Limbo in Catholic belief is a place where unbaptized souls go to stay after they die, because they were rejected from God, but because they didn't sin against God or know God, they weren't sent to hell, so God sends them to Limbo. However, I don't think that we are actually in Limbo indoors. Think about it. If it was Limbo, then doors would be infinite, and we know, because of the direct inspiration from Spooky's jump scare mansion, doors will end at door 1000, which means that we might actually be in purgatory. I say this because of two things. One, if Guiding Light is an archangel, then he would be from God. So if it was Limbo, then we wouldn't be in contact with him, because limbo is separate from God. And 2, we are clearly dealing with sins here in the form of the entities. Think about it. Guiding Light says to us that the entities are what we would call, not what he or the other architects would call, meaning that their names are unknown to us and more than likely have a deeper meaning. Purgatory is where baptized people who haven't gotten their last rites or have died on the battlefield go to atone for their sins until they are ready to be with God. This would mean that all of the entities that we are dealing with are our past sins that we are having to endure. This would also explain why Guiding Light can kill some of the weaker entities like Rush or Giggles, who might represent something like a white lie, but can only restrict more powerful ones like the Figure, or Seek, who might represent the deadly sins of greed or rage, which is why they are able to break free, because they are more powered up with the help of the other architects. That brings us to our next architect, Mischievous Light. We don't know much about her other than that she is the one who breaks entities free in the doors, and is the one who makes the modifiers. But even with that information, we can determine that she is against us. This is because from the modifiers, we can tell that she has control over the entities indoors. This more than likely means that she either created them or just has genuine power over them. Now, at first, I thought that she was the devil. I mean, the entities represent sin, and the devil makes humans sin, hence the control. But I actually don't think that's the case. This is because of 2 main reasons. 1, the devil was Lucifer before God banished him to hell because he betrayed God. This would make the devil be addressed by he instead of she. And 2, L Splash already confirmed that despite the crucifix doors just takes loose inspiration from Christianity. So from this I concluded that Mischievous Light is Lilith. If Mischievous Light is Lilith, it would explain the female pronouns and also the power level. Lilith is from false documents of Genesis labeled as overzealous fan fiction. Lilith was Adam's original wife that was created alongside Adam but was separated from him when Lilith didn't listen to Adam, causing God to banish her to marry Satan. This would explain the power level and relation to sin that she has over the player. It would make her as powerful as Guiding Light, but not as powerful as Satan. This would also mean that she is trying to drag us down to hell and make us give up on trying to redeem ourselves in purgatory, which would stem from her hatred for all of humanity and God after what God and Adam did to her. So, from this, we know that Doors take place in purgatory and is based off of Catholicism and Bible fan fiction like Lilith, which would also make the God of the Doors universe being much more vague and indirect, making the God of the Doors universe Curious Light. Now, I know that sounds like a huge stretch because we've barely got to know anything about Curious Light. The most that we've seen of him has been in the rooms and the back doors that we weren't even supposed to go into in the first place. But what if I told you that from these interactions alone, he almost completely tells us who he is? When we meet Curious Light, he doesn't say you died, he just says, oh, you're dead, and then proceeds to not help us much on what to do. He more or so expects us to be better, like how the God portrayed in the Lilith story expected her to be better, and also was much less helpful than the God in the Christian Bible. More proof of this would be how Curious Light has the ability to make objects like the levers in the back rooms which the other lights can't do, meaning that he is a creator of some sort, possibly hinting at him creating doors. This would mean that he has the capability to take us out of the back rooms, but instead chooses to just help us and see if we can endure, just like how the God in Catholicism would make soldiers have to deal with their sins instead of just helping them directly. And the icing on the cake to all of this would be the painting that shows all 3 lights, which shows Curious Light being much bigger than all of the other lights, which hints at him being vastly more powerful than all of the other lights, similar to how God is more powerful than his angels, further confirming that he is the God of Doors. Now, you might be wondering why this video isn't over. Well, I came across this line from Curious Light that says, "The back rooms are as old as the hotel." Now, this seems decently normal, but the way he says this rubs me the wrong way. He says it like he was there when it was created, implying that he didn't create the back rooms or the hotel. And past this, Curious Light straight up insults us and tells us to quit. Even if it's a false version of God like the one depicted in Lilith's story, I doubt the developers wouldn't stray away from the basic morals and judgment of the Christian/Catholic God. So who is Curious Light? Well, what if I told you that he is actually the devil? Let me explain. The devil in the Bible is known as a deceiver who will appear to be nice, but deep down is not. For Curious Light, we know that he appears to help us indoors, but we don't know what his true motives are. For Mischievous Light and Guiding Light, we know whose side they're on directly from how obvious it is if they hate us or love us. But for Curious Light, we have no idea what he wants because he tries to confuse us on whose side he's on. He helps us just enough to gain our trust, but not enough to be directly trying to help us like Guiding Light. Beyond this, let's look at Curious Light's theme. It is very similar to guiding lights, but it seems again more vague. This would make sense if Curious Light is the devil because the devil is a fallen angel, hence why the theme would be similar and not directly like guiding lights. Also, this would explain the size of Curious Light in the painting. The size of him implies that his power has restrictions, but he is more powerful than Mischievous and Guiding Light, also backing up the idea that he is the devil, because the devil before he was a fallen angel was second next to God, which lead him to betray God because of the envy he felt, leading me to believe he is trying to manipulate us to break him out of the rooms so he can cause chaos indoors/purgatory. Think about it. Curious Light never tries to directly stop us because he knows that he can't in the rooms. If we die in the rooms, we just get sent back to the doors and we can still escape purgatory. It seems like Curious Light is stuck in the rooms and can't get out due to a restriction put on him by God or an angel like Curious Light, hence why he would need to break out to go interfere with the doors. Past this, at the end of the rooms, we are greeted with a large void-filled room that leads us to a glowing door. Let's focus on the void. In the Bible, the void is a part of hell that is kinda like permanent death. It's just an infinite void that was there before the Big Bang. But the most important part is that it's a part of hell, of which is where Satan lives. This would mean that through us breaking out of the rooms, Curious Light can escape into purgatory and cause more death and destruction for at least the player's soul, claiming more lives to take away from God. So from all of this, we can conclude that doors will end with Guiding Light, trying to protect us, while Mischievous Light and Curious Light will be trying to drag us down to hell, to separate us permanently from the God of which they hate, leading to us fighting them off with Guiding Light, ending with us defeating Curious and Mischievous Light, freeing us from purgatory and leading us to heaven. The entities. We only know that they represent an emotion or a sin because of the religious references in Doors, and their only goal is to kill us, which is why today I'm covering each one to find out where they come from and what they are. From Rush to Queen Grumble, here's every entity in Doors explained. Rush flickers the lights before he rushes the player, hence his name. Rush resembles a manic face that seems rageful, so he could possibly represent a sin or negative emotion like rage. Ambush is like Rush, but he comes back and ambushes the player after he goes ahead in the doors, causing the player to have to time hiding and watching. Ambush resembles a screaming face, possibly representing something like insanity because he's constantly repeating his actions. Hide appears when the player sits in a closet or locker for too long. He is an abstract red creature that would represent something like anxiety because he only shows up after we are in a locker hiding from entities for too long. Halt will first flicker the lights before chasing the player slowly and constantly teleporting behind and in front of the player, while showing arrows on the screen to indicate he's changing sides. Halt is a blue ghost with glowing eyes, possibly representing something like double-mindedness or going back on one's word because he constantly changes where's at undecidedly. Eyes will sit and wait in a room for the player to look at him to damage the player. Eyes is a bundle of eyes that represents something like social anxiety or paranoia because Eyes hates people looking at it. Seek is our first boss entity that we see in Doors. He chases us down while Guiding Light helps us escape from him, while Seek will use his goo to create hands that will try to grab us or will knock down furniture to prevent us from escaping. We know that Seek has the ability to corrupt us and other entities like Screech or Queen Grumble, meaning that he has the capability to be more powerful than any other entity in Doors. We also know that he has eyes everywhere in the floors because his eyes appear before and after we get near to him, possibly meaning that he has them planted in every room to watch us. Because Seek can corrupt entities, I think that he represents the deadly sin of envy. This is because he constantly wants more things to corrupt and literally puts eyes around the floors to have an eye on anything that he wants. He also chases us down and will destroy anything in his path to get what he wants. Screech will whisper to us before we catch him, or he attacks us, both of which will result in him screeching at us. Screech is a Seek-corrupted giggle from Floor 2 that can somehow appear in Floor 1 even though he shouldn't, possibly meaning that he follows Seek like a leader. We know that Seek changed his vocal cords to be louder, and to also make them be more agile and quiet than the giggles, hence why they can stick onto us without making much noise. The figure is the second boss we see in Doors. He goes off of sound and whatever he catches in his spotlight in front of his head, charging at whatever he hears or sees and destroying it. We see what seems to be multiple figures in Doors. We see one in the library and one at the end of the hotel. And then we see multiple figures in the mines that are spread across as we traverse. The figures seem to come from these flesh puddles that we see in the mines and inside of the castle walls at the end of floor 2. It seems like they are similar to Seek in the sense that they can manifest or grow from these puddles found across the floors. The only problem is that we don't see these puddles in the hotel, making me think that there are multiple figures spread across the floors. This could possibly because we know the figure eats the gloom bats in the mines, which could be why we see more flesh puddles in the mines, which could be from previous figures reproducing asexually. Because the figure goes off of sound, and what's directly in front of him, I think that he represents rage because of the fact that he destroys anything that makes sound with rage. He is also blind, hinting at the term blind rage. And past this, he devours constantly, which almost none of the other entities do, possibly representing how rage devours everything around it. Dread only appears after the player waits in a room for hours on end and then progresses, resulting in the lights going out and Dread spawning him to kill the player. Now what's strange is that Dread is the only entity that will make the player hear their own breathing. Now, I have a theory that Dread will be manifested as a much bigger entity in a later floor because of how interesting his mechanics are. Now obviously, he represents Dread, which although isn't a deadly sin, would fit into the fact that doors will have 10 floors, and there are only 7 deadly sins, hence why he could be a much bigger boss later on. Jeff is the shopkeep indoors and sells us useful items that we can use later on. However, Jeff somehow has access to hard-to-find items like the crucifix that literally empowers a celestial to kill or restrict an entity. This makes me believe that although Jeff looks and seems friendly, he represents the sin of greed. Now, although I love Jeff, think about it. He charges a lot of gold for products that we need. He will kill us when we try to steal anything, and he is represented as a tentacle monster. Throughout history, octopuses and squids represent greed because of their many tentacles that are used to grab anything and everything. We also don't see Jeff's full body, and just his eyes with 2 tips of his tentacles. This could mean that Jeff could possibly be a later boss in the game that wants to prevent us from getting out due to a celestial making him, or because we might get near to his gold storage that he hides from us. Now you might be asking who will take over the shop when Jeff is gone? Well, El Goblino has a voice line that says he always wanted a shop of his own, which would be like foreshadowing to him taking over Jeff's shop when he's gone in the floors after Jeff's boss fight. El Goblino is a Latino goblin that's friendly toward us and talks to us. We know that he has a mom and some sort of relationship with a girl because of his voice lines. We also know through his voice lines that he is aware of the fact Doors takes place in a limbo or hell-like place because he wonders why he got here and is also aware of the higher powers like Guiding Light and even possibly even Curious Light and Mischievous Light because of his lines. Bob saw those blue particles, but they weren't blue, implying Curious Light's particles. And also when he used a crucifix in the figure, it turned red, implying Mischievous Light's powers. El Goblino seems to not represent anything because he got here naturally, possibly meaning that he will leave with us when we escape.
I am dead.
Bob is the friend of El Goblino and doesn't talk to us. We know that he is either an entity or a dead human that still somehow talks and explores the floors, because we hear El Goblino talk about him like he is alive. Bob, much like El Goblino, doesn't represent anything yet. Because he is a skeleton, he could represent death. But I doubt that's the case, because he's mostly been seen as just being friendly and has no foreshadowing from El Goblino like Jeff. So I'm guessing he will escape with us at the end of Doors too. Gloom bats are bats that come out of eggs found in the mines. They attack the player whenever they have a light source that isn't a glow stick. They function similar to moths in the sense of them flying towards illuminated things, which is why the figure has a spotlight so the gloom bats will fly inside of it, similar to an anglerfish and its prey. Because gloom bats go after whatever is shiny and has light, I think that they represent something like consumerism, and not directly something as powerful as envy because of their direct correlation with the figure who consumes them. Giggles sit on top of the ceilings in the mines and giggle while waiting for the player to go below it so it can drop down on their face, causing the player to have to shake it off or for another player to help detach it. Giggles are weak to laser pointers, and also are baby versions of the Grumbles we see after floor 150, which means that they are from reproduction, making them different from every other entity indoors. Because Giggles laugh and latch onto the player, I think they represent attachment. The Grumbles are the more mature version of Giggles that patrol the nest in floor 150. We know that there are at least 5 of them, and they protect the Giggles and eggs from the Grumble family. Grumbles work like worker ants in the Grumble family and will make Giggles with the queen. They also seem to have grown 2 more tentacles as they've grown older, similar to the Screeches. Because Grumbles are just bigger Giggles that patrol the nest and have the need to protect, I think they represent obsession. Queen Grumble is the queen of the Grumbles and is the entity that chases us at the end of the first Seek chase in Floor 2, and at the end of Floor 2 when we enter the castle. She has 8 tentacles compared to the 6 that the regular Grumbles have, and also has a scar in the middle of her forehead, possibly from defending her nest against Seek, who wants to corrupt her babies. Because Queen Grumble is the main protector of the Grumbles, and she does it out of motherly love, I think she represents love. Now this sounds good, until we get to the end of Floor 2 when she gets corrupted by Seek. Now when envy is mixed with love, it becomes lust, possibly making her become a boss in Floor 3. Timothy is a spider that scares us occasionally when we open drawers or lockers. Timothy seems to just be like a gag, kinda like how Bob is, so I doubt he represents anything. Dupe is an entity that makes a duplicate of an exit door, making the player have to remember the number of the previous door to find out which one to go into. Because Dupe tried to trick the player, I think he represents trickery. Void only appears to kill anyone who is too far behind whoever the leading player is. Because Void goes after people who are left behind, I think he represents loneliness. Shadow is an extremely rare entity that only jump scares the player and does no damage. Because Shadow is a shadow, I think he represents the fear of the dark. Snare, when stepped on, damages the player with its pointy vines sticking out. Now the snares are interesting because they are a plant creature compared to how all of the other entities are types of animals, ghosts, or monsters, which is why I think their core might become a boss later on in Floor 3. This is because all of the snares are connected by vines that we interact with in the greenery rooms in Floors 1 and 2. Because they are connected, they have to have some sort of source, which I think will be seen in Floor 3 because of the fact that we will be constantly going from inside to outside in the floor, while also being around many plants. Hence why we might see the snare's core accompanied by leaked entities like the Venus flytrap. I think that the snares represent something like gossiping because they are interconnected and wait for you to get close to attack. Now it's time for the speed round. Blitz is a faster version of Rush. The Lookman is a variation of Eyes. A 60 is a different form of Rush, but he permanently takes out the lights. A 90 will appear on the player's screen and will kill them unless they stop moving. And finally, a 120 is like a reverse version of Rush coming from the front instead of the back. Haste is the boss of the back doors, who is a red skull that will appear when the player doesn't complete the minigame in time. Because Haste kills the player when they don't do something quick enough, I think Haste represents impatience. Guiding Light is a celestial that guides us throughout the doors. He takes the form of blue sparkles, and when the player dies, we see his spiritual form in the form of a moon. Guiding Light can make objects like mine carts or wheels, knock over smaller objects like candles, block entrances to prevent bigger entities from getting to the player, can also exorcise weaker entities like the PNGs, and can restrict bigger entities like the figure. We know Guiding Light also interacts with other passive entities like El Goblino because of his line about curious light that hints at him and Bob seeing Guiding Light's blue sparkles. Besides this, we know that Guiding Light's physical form is this statue in the courtyard that looks like a guardian angel. This could hint at him being the representation of good and life in general. Curious Light is the second celestial that we see, and strangely enough, we only see him in the rooms and the back doors. Unlike Guiding Light, Curious Light doesn't guide us or help us and lets us figure everything out for ourselves unless we die too many times, of which then he will give us a hint on what to do. It seems like Curious Light knows much more than they are letting on to, because they seem to have connections with Mischievous Light, because they say that she named the entities, which means that the she can't be Guiding Light because Guiding Light says this is what you would call the entities, seemingly hiding the truth of who named them from us. Curious Light most likely represents uncertainty, because they are uncertain if they should help us or not, and we are uncertain if they are on our side or not. Mischievous Light is the third and final celestial that seems to be against us. I say this because her symbol is the modifier's icon, which implies she has control over the entities. And also, whenever we crucify a more important entity like Seek, it turns red and breaks, implying that Mischievous Light, who is red, broke the seal from the crucifix. But other than that, we only know that she is like the opposite of Guiding Light, meaning that she most likely represents evil or death. And that was all of the entities indoors. Make sure to leave your theories down below and like and subscribe. Hey, editor's note, there are more entities like Sally or Louie, but they aren't really that lore significant and are just similar entities to Timothy. The figure. We've seen him 3 times in game. The first was in the library, the second was in the electrical room, and the third was strangely enough in the mines. Wait, the mines? That's a weird place for him to be. It's almost like the devs are telling us something about the figure. It's almost like they're showing us that there is more than one figure. Let's start off with his appearance in Floor 1. As soon as we go in floor 50, the figure tries to kill us, but then Guiding Light knocks over a candle, causing him to destroy it. After this, we get the code to go to door 51 while hiding from the figure and making as little noise as possible. But then after we get to floor 100, we see him again as the final boss of floor 1. Now how did he get here? We know he couldn't have just walked to door 100 because doors is linear and he would have to pass us to get there. We also know that he couldn't have jumped out the window and got there that way because there would be no vibrations leading him to the electrical room. So this leaves two possibilities. The first is that he teleported there similar to how Seek teleports from his goo. Now if we look at the figure, we just see bones and flesh, which is exactly what the flesh puddles we see in the electrical rooms and the mines are made out of. Now the only problem with the teleport theory is how did these puddles get here and how does the figure teleport through them? For Seek, it's more understandable because his goo is like water and is all across the floors of the hotels, hence why he can chase us so frequently and how we had a huge boss fight against him in floor 2. But for the figure, however, he's made of flesh and bones, and besides that, he has a spotlight. All of these things can't just be formed like how Seek's goop can. And besides this, we don't see any flesh puddles in the library where we see the figure first, meaning he can't teleport there. And besides all of this, we know the figure can ingest food because he eats the glow bats in the mines. So this means that there's only one way for the figure to be in the electrical room, and the mines, which is the second possibility that there's multiple figures. Let's go back to those flesh puddles. Although we know the figure can't teleport between them, I believe that they can make more figures. This is because the flesh puddles are positioned specifically around the mines, which is also where the gloom bats are located. I believe that the figures would want to stay around the mines because they need food to survive, hence why the puddles of flesh would be around gloombat nests as well. The only problem with this is how did the flesh puddles get there in the first place? The only other places where we see flesh are in us and the Grumbles and Giggles. We know it can't be us because of the fact that doors takes place in either limbo as hinted at on the code in front of the statue in the courtyard, or in Dante's Inferno's version of hell because of the multiple layers and Catholic inspiration in doors. Either way, we would not be made out of flesh, but instead would be a soul or spirit manifesting a human body. Hence why we still have a heartbeat during the heartbeat minigame and lungs to breathe during the dread encounter. And past this, if they were from us, then we would see more of them in floor 1, but we only see them in the electrical room. This would mean that the Giggles and Grumbles would have to be where these puddles come from because they're the only other fleshy monsters in the mines. This would also explain why the figure squashes the Giggles when he sees them instead of eating them like how he does with the gloom bats. This would also explain why there's so many puddles in the mines, especially around the Grumble nests. From my guess, after the figures kill the Giggles or find dead Grumbles, they put them in the puddles to make new figures. But all of this begs the question, how did the figures even get to floor 1? They don't know how to operate an elevator, and they also have no reason to stay in a library and past that an electrical room. And beyond all of this, how did the figures even get a spotlight in the first place? The Grumbles have nothing like that inside of them. Unless the original figure did not originate from the Giggles. I mean, think about it. We only see one at a time, which would make no sense if they only come from the flesh puddles that we see everywhere in the mines. To explain this, let's look back at Doors when it first came out. If we look at the figure back then, we see that he had no spotlight, but strangely enough in the hotel, plus update, he gained his spotlight. Now, why is that important? Well, let's look at the biggest addition to the Hotel Plus update, the rooms and Curious Light. Curious Light is one of the most mysterious characters in Doors. We know he's a marked celestial, and that he's way more powerful than Guiding and Mischievous Light. But the weird thing is that we don't know what he actually does. We know that Guiding Light guides the humans and other friendly creatures indoors, and Mischievous Light helps and boosts the entities indoors. Because of the modifiers and the strange red light we always see around, Seek that has no reason to be there unless Mischievous is creating it due to him not being a PNG. So that means that Curious Light is more than likely a mediator between the two, leading me to believe that he gave the figure a spotlight. This is because Curious Light is neutral, meaning that because he interacts with us and helps us with rifts and starlight, he has to balance it out with helping some of the entities. From my guess, he chose the figure because he isn't as dangerous as Seek, but also isn't as weak as a PNG. This would mean that he would assist in building the figures up from the puddles, and would give them the yellow spotlight as a form of survival for their fleshly bodies. This would also fit into the idea that the architects cannot create entities or floors, but can simply empower them. Because Curious Light is more powerful than the others, however, I think that he instead formed the figures out of the Grumbles' dead bodies. Think about it. Presuming that the Grumbles die, where else would they go? I mean, it would make sense for us to see their dead bodies, or maybe even skeletons, but we don't, leading me to believe that all of them were grabbed by Curious Light and used to form the figures. This would be accompanied by the Curious Light's guidance in the form of their spotlight, which would help them hunt food like the already existing glow bats, which go after anything luminescent. This would also make sense because if Curious Light did reconstruct them, they would be unable to be immortal like the other entities, meaning that they would need food to survive. This would also explain how there's a figure in the library. We know that they can move through the doors to get where they need to go, most likely meaning that after Curious Light formed them, the library figure would try to find him again to see if he can create more of his kind. But due to Curious Light being locked behind a locked doors, he couldn't find him, resulting in the figure residing in the library, trying to find a way to unlock a door that he can't even see. So with all of this, we know that the figure was originally created by Curious Light through the Grumble corpses and now reside in the mines, living off of glow bats and forming giggle corpses into puddles to try to make more of themselves, hoping that Curious Light will come back to form them. But there's one small plot hole. Why is there a flesh puddle inside of the castle we see at the end of floor 2? I mean, we know the figures come from the Grumbles, so it wouldn't make sense for them to be in the castle, which is only connected to the sewers of which the figures can't even go to without running into Seek. Unless maybe the castle's king is Curious Light, who would make the figures not just to hurt humans, but also to defend his castle. Now I know this sounds like a stretch, but think about it. Curious Light, as we know right now, is only seen in the rooms and the back doors, unlike Curious and Mischievous being seen all across the floors. This leads me to believe that Curious Light is seen by the entities as the king/god of doors, even though we know that he isn't due to the fact that he is just a marked celestial. However, we know that he is more powerful than the other architects and made the figures, making me believe that he did not only make the figures to deter us, but to also guard his castle. I doubt the castle was built by him, but it is a likely possibility that he was the king of the castle at some point and was guarded by the figures. This would fit with the theme of all of the architects being held to high regard by the entities, which we know because of the guardian angel statue that represents the only guardian we know of that other entities like El Goblino are aware of guiding light. This leads me to believe that at some point in time, Curious Light was the king of the castle and made the figures to guard him from Mischievous Light. But at some point in time, Curious Light was sealed away in the rooms and other pocket dimensions to prevent him from being in the doors. This would also be why we see the puddles in the castle and why we see the figures in the mines. We know they eat glow bats. So what if Curious Light fed them glow bats in the castle, and when he was locked away, the figures fled to the only place the glow bats can naturally be, the mines. This would also mean that the figures traveled back up to the castle to find their previous leader, hence why there's puddles right outside the gate. Now this is where the theory stops until floor 3 comes out and we find out what happened to Curious Light. My best idea is that Mischievous Light used Seek to help lock Curious Light up, but that would also contradict the fan theory that Mischievous Light is the she that Curious Light talks about in his lines. So who do you guys think sealed away Curious Light? Make sure to like and subscribe. The Grumbles. We see them in floor 2 and they chase us down in door 150. However, there's something I noticed about the Grumbles that nobody has pointed out yet. That is that these Grumbles have a dark history with previous humans that might even tell us how we got to doors in the first place. Let's start off with the Queen Grumble. Queen Grumble is the Grumble that chases us before we enter the nest, and after we escape the mines, she's bigger than the rest of the Grumbles and also has a scar on her forehead. Wait, a scar? That's a weird detail for the devs to add. Well, from this scar, we can tell that the Grumbles are being constantly attacked by some other entities. I believe that these entities are the figure and Seek. The figure I believe because he squashes the giggles and hates noise, hence why he might try to attack the Grumbles despite the size difference because he cannot see. For Seek, on the other hand, we have a lot more lore. We see Seek's corrupted giggles laid in clumps across the Grumble nests, and also we see Seek corrupt Queen Grumble at the end of floor 2. But why does Seek hate the Grumbles? I mean, he doesn't hate the other entities like the Gloom Bats, because if he did, we would see corrupted versions of them, which makes me believe that the Grumbles and Seek are in a constant war due to something that happened when they were first created. I believe that this something is the fact that the Grumbles weren't made by the architects, or the hinted at God that made the architects like the other entities, but instead were made by humans. This makes sense because of two things: what the Grumbles are and where Doors takes place. For what the Grumbles are, we see that they are organic beings like the figure, but strangely enough, they can reproduce. Now I point this out because no other entity in Doors can reproduce because they all have no parts to do so. All of them are either a singular being like the figure in Seek or multiple versions of some kind of implied negative emotion or sin like the PNGs. Another strange thing about the Grumbles is that they don't need to eat like how the figure figure does. We know that the figure eats gloom bats or us to survive, but strangely the Grumbles don't eat anything and just throw us instead of eating us. But what's also strange about this is the figure doesn't eat the giggles, but just stomps on them and kills them to reduce noise. What's strange about this is that if the giggles are organic like the gloom bats, then why doesn't the figure eat them? And another weird detail is that the Grumble nest has no giggle eggs anywhere, but just has Grumbles roaming around the halls with seek clusters. All of this makes me believe that because the Grumbles aren't like the figure, but also are nothing like seek, they have to be a type of tumor. Now at first I thought that they were overgrown amoebas, but the problem with that is that the Grumbles have eyes and teeth while also being able to make noise and feel vibrations. Because of this I did some digging and found a type of tumor named a teratomas. Teratomas tumors, although a form of cancer, can grow teeth, eyes, nerves, skin, and even other forms of organs like a voice box, which all exactly describe what the Grumbles have. Think about it. The Grumbles don't have to eat like every other animal, but they can reproduce, implying that it is asexual reproduction, which would align with a tumor spreading. Beyond this, it would also explain why they are just big mouth balls with fingers. If they are a tumor, they wouldn't need organs to survive and can just live off of itself alone. This also explains why the figure would not eat them. If the giggles are recently split Grumbles, then of course he wouldn't eat them because they would just be bones and skin with no nutritional value, unlike us or the glowbats. And this could also explain how Seek can corrupt them and why he does so. If the Grumbles are overgrown tumors, then of course Seek would hate them because they aren't supposed to be in the mines, unlike the figure or the other entities which were specifically placed there. But all of this leads to the second question. How did the Grumbles get there in the first place? If the Grumbles are tumors and aren't supposed to be indoors, then wouldn't that mean that Doors was compromised by something organic? To explain this, we have to know that Doors takes place in the dev's Catholic-inspired version of Purgatory, Limbo, or Hell itself, because of the many hints that we are given throughout the floors with the crucifix, 3 celestials, multiple floors as a reference to Dante's Inferno, El Goblino, and the statue's code that says Limbo. I'm going to stick with the idea that it is inspired from a mix of all of these, and it is the dev's version of Limbo. This also implies that Doors takes place in a different dimension that humans should not be able to access, similar to a concept like the backrooms. This would also be why Seek and other entities chase us, because they know we're not supposed to be there. You might be asking, how does this relate to the Grumbles? Well, what if I told you that the Grumbles imply that humans found a way to enter into Limbo without dying first? Now, this doesn't make much sense at first until we look at the rooms and the back doors. Now, what's interesting about the rooms and the back doors is that they are subsections of doors that lead into the hotel. Now, the rooms specifically make no sense because it is implied that they are in an entirely new dimension than Doors. But if we look closer at the rooms, we see some strange details. The first detail is that the rooms look unfinished. They are more blocky and are also much more crude, which implies that they were not made by a god or architect because they don't follow the design of the rest of Doors. The second detail is the entities are also different and are all labeled as A, and then a number, which also makes the rooms seem artificial. The third detail is the final room of rooms, which has a lot of floating glowing doors in a void. All of these details combined lead me to believe that the rooms were accidentally made by the humans as a result of them experimenting a way to cross over to other dimensions. This would explain the glowing doors at the end, which we know all lead to different dimensions because the one we walk through takes us back to the hotel. I believe that the humans made a portal similar to how in Kane Pixel's Backrooms found footage. A sink made a portal to the backrooms, but instead in the Doors universe, by making a dimensional portal to Limbo, they created a whole new version of Doors. This would first explain why after we enter the hotel from the rooms, we see a strange portal-like structure from behind us, implying that we didn't come back entirely naturally. This would secondly explain the reason why the rooms are a workplace area. It seems that Doors floors are following history backwards. First we have a hotel from World War II, then we have the mines and sewers from the Industrial Revolution, and then we have a castle from the Middle Ages or Renaissance. So this implies that because the humans made the portal, a whole new floor would have been created that wasn't supposed to exist. And because it would follow the trends of the other floors, the rooms were made into an unfinished workplace with unfinished entities and no bosses. From my guess, after the dimensional portal was made, the humans would explore the floors expecting to find something interesting to only be killed in the mines, leading their bodies to be turned into tumors, which would result in the Grumbles being made. And because the Grumbles are constantly dividing, it would explain how the entities haven't killed them yet. But there's one small detail I missed. The architects. Now, the problem with the architects is that if the humans did truly come from the portals and didn't enter Limbo through the intended way, then why do the architects not just stop them? I mean, we know they have the power to because of the architect's respective seals that they can create to block entities or us from going in certain doors. So why didn't Curious just seal off the dimensional doors? Well, I believe that the architects were made for the purpose of stopping the humans from entering limbo. But because the god of doors isn't always present, it seems like the architects rebelled in their respective ways, hence why they are the way they are. This makes sense because as seen in the three lights painting, Curious is the biggest of the two and Guiding and Mischievous are the smaller ones. I believe that Curious was made to protect the rooms and other pocket dimensions from being accessed by the humans, hence why we don't see him in the regular floors and why he's bound to the rooms. This would also explain why he's the biggest in the picture because he would serve the most important role. This would also explain why all of the doors are bright yellow, implying that Curious is blocking them and is controlling whether we can go in or out of the rooms and floors of doors. After Curious, however, we have Guiding Light and Mischievous Light, who I think were there to serve as a cleanup to the actual floors. I believe this because of how they work as the opposite of each other. If we look at Guiding Light, we see how he is trying his best to guide us through the doors to help us escape. From my guess, Guiding Light was used to help guide the souls who would go to limbo naturally, which would explain why he helps us and even tells us how to get past certain entities. For Mischievous, however, I think that her job was to kill the humans that weren't supposed to be in the floors. I believe that Mischievous would create entities like Seek to help this. This would also explain the modifiers where we see Mischievous's icon. In modifiers runs, we have the option to take out Guiding Light's help. If we do this, we see in the painting that Guiding Light is no longer present, implying that the modifiers are a way to see what the humans who entered the doors without permission would have went through. Through this, we see Mischievous's true power being used for the purpose of killing humans, showing her true purpose. However, after all of the humans were killed, it seems like the god of doors chose to not remove the architects from limbo, which would cause all of them to continue to serve their roles with almost no purpose. For Curious Light, after not seeing any humans for a while, he became curious and tried to find out more about the doors and how everything works, as seen with his voice lines about knowing about the hotel's age and his ability to create starlight and rifts to aid us indoors. For Guiding Light, he continues to guide us because that's the only thing he can do. But now he is needed more than ever because of Mischievous Light. For Mischievous Light, it seems like she wanted to cause mischief indoors, hence why she still tries to kill us and also lets the entities roam free. This would explain entities like Seek, Figure, and any other boss entities because it seems like she made them to kill the humans. And because all of the humans are dead, she has no other purpose left except for now to kill all of the souls that go through the doors normally with her creations. Although she doesn't control them anymore, she can still empower them through the modifiers that she offers us to turn on for a reward, causing even more mischief. Besides that, Mischievous also explains how the Grumbles were created. It seems like after all of the humans were dead, their bodies seemed to rapidly produce cancerous tumors. Mischievous Light could have seen this and facilitated the growth of these tumors, causing the Grumbles to be created and for them to be another threat for us to have to deal with. But what do you guys think? Do you think I'm wrong? Or do you think there's more to this theory that I didn't talk about? Let me know below and like and subscribe. The rooms. They're the only other place than the back doors where we see Curious Light. But unlike the back doors, the rooms make no sense. They have 1,000 doors that are based off an office and also has weird entities that make no sense in the context of where doors takes place. Wait, an office? That's a weird detail for the devs to add. It's almost like they're telling us something about the rooms. It's almost like they're telling us that the rooms were not made by the architects or the god of doors. To explain, let's start off with how we get to the rooms. To get to the rooms, we need the skeleton key that Jeff sells, and we need to unlock a random hidden away barricaded door we find a few doors later. This already raises a lot of questions, but the most prevalent is, how did Jeff get the key? I mean, wouldn't it make more sense to be a reward for a boss fight or for beating a floor? Well, if we look at Jeff's shop, there's actually a few hints on how he got it. The only thing in Jeff's shop that has any relation to the rooms is Bob, who is a human skeleton that has a name tag in the rooms. But why would Bob have a key that locks away the rooms? And also, how did Bob get here in the first place? The fact that he's a human skeleton implies that he didn't get to doors the way we did by dying first, but instead, he somehow got to doors while still alive. So that raises the question, how did Bob get here? Well, if we look at the rooms where Bob came from, we see the only way to get into or out of the rooms is through a portal that Curious Light makes, which at face value implies that Curious Light let humans into the rooms, but I don't think that's the case. See, the rooms themselves make no sense to exist with the rest of doors. And beyond that, why would Curious Light let humans in just to make sure they lock away the rooms anyways? So this made me look at the end of rooms when we go into the void with a bunch of glowing doors. These doors, unlike the ones we need to get in or out of the rooms, are white, implying that Curious Light did not create them. The fact that when we go through one of these doors we go to the hotel implies that they all go somewhere else, which solves how the humans got to the rooms. But there's one flaw with this. The rooms were clearly not made by the architects or the god of doors because of the way it looks and how the entities are different and weirdly named. All of this leads to only one answer, that the humans made a portal to the rooms, and then through the rooms they were able to go to the hotel, which is how Bob got there. From my guess, the humans made a portal to try to go to the hotel or something like the back doors. But when they did, because they didn't get there naturally by dying, they accidentally generated a whole new floor that wasn't supposed to exist yet. Think about it. Each floor and doors is seemingly regressing in history. First we have the hotel from World War II, then the mines from the Industrial Revolution, and then a castle from the Renaissance or Middle Ages. So the office we see in the rooms would be a step after the hotel, implying that it is a newly created floor, but because of how the entities aren't fully formed yet and how the floor itself isn't as polished as the others, it implies that it was generated accidentally. So when the humans went through the dimensional portal, they saw it wasn't like the doors they wanted to go to. So when they got to the end of rooms, which for them would be door 1, they made a new portal that linked them to the hotel. After they got to the hotel, they would leave stuff that they brought around it, like flashlights or lighters, and would industrialize certain floors, like the mines, when they would add modern technology in certain rooms that we see in the minecart tracks or in the Grumble nest. But you might be asking, why wouldn't Curious Light just stop them before they got to doors? Well, the least likely first explanation is that Curious let them through because he was curious on what they would do. But after a while, he got bored and sealed off the rooms for dead people only. The problem with this is that Curious doesn't care about the humans as we know because of how he interacts with us. If he did just let them pass, he wouldn't show himself like he does to us unless they died, which implies the 3 lights painting wouldn't even have him in it, and definitely not him as the literal star of the painting. And beyond that, how would they even know Mischievous existed to paint her? All of this implies the second explanation, that Curious and the other architects were made by the god of doors to prevent the humans from furthering their expansion into doors. Now, I know this sounds weird, but let's look at the facts. We know the architects are marked celestials because of the line, "One of the 3 marked celestials helped you." We also know that they all serve different roles that all would fit into the idea that they were preventing humans from entering doors. Think about it. Somehow when Guiding Light tells us the name of the entities, he says this is what you would call them. It would make no sense for him to say that, unless we had an idea of a name beforehand or if he made it up. But if he did make it up, then why would he not just give us the real name? Wouldn't that be easier? Past Guiding Light, we have Mischievous, who might just tell us exactly what happened to the humans through her modifiers. If we turn on all modifiers, we see that Guiding Light is no longer present, but instead, it is only Mischievous and Curious. We also know that doors gets extraordinarily hard, and actually can become impossible with enough modifiers on. Now, why would this exist if it was only for a gameplay mechanic? Why would they add an impossible version of the game with one of the 3 architects if it wasn't supposed to tell us something? And beyond both of these architects, if we look at the 3 lights painting, which we could assume the humans painted, we see that Curious is the biggest out of the 3. This implies that Curious was the most important, which would make sense if he was blocking them from returning to the rooms. What if Curious was made to not be a mediator between the 2 lights, but instead he was created to prevent humans who were still living to be able to go to doors, which is why he is in the rooms? That would explain why all of the portals have a yellow light around them and aren't just clear or white. If Curious is the one allowing passage, then it would make sense for him to also be able to prevent passage. But you might still be asking, why are the rooms locked behind a skeleton key and the back doors behind a weird gate? Well, here is where the theory gets into even heavier speculation. But with what we have so far, I think I can make a loose timeline on what happened with the humans. From my best guess, the humans constructed a dimensional portal to try to go to limbo or doors for an unknown reason. When they did, they accidentally created the rooms. But after they noticed the rooms were not the doors they thought they would find, they started to explore. They would go through the rooms and find entities that they would have to hide away from, naming them after the numbers of the rooms when they would start, or for them, stop appearing. When they got to the end of the rooms, however, they found that there was no other glowing doors that would lead them to doors. So they would construct a new portal that would bring them to the rooms. This portal would go to where we see the skeleton key door in the hotel. After they explored the hotel, they would eventually stumble across the end and would come across a large hole in a room. So they would form an electrical room around the hole and would build an elevator to get down it. When they entered the mines, they would begin to bring technology to it too, in the form of control modules or automatic doors. However, the further they progressed, the more attention they attracted, eventually making the god of doors create 3 celestials to clean up the humans. He would make guiding to guide the humans who entered doors through dying first, so it wouldn't be as hard for them. This would be why we see guiding light in-game, but when we turn on modifiers, he's gone. After he made guiding, he would make curious, who would make sure no more humans could come in or out of doors by him sealing all of the dimensional portals going in or out of doors. This would be why we can enter through the rooms, but guiding light cannot. However, after the god of doors made curious, he realized that the humans still weren't dying and continued to progress through doors. So he created Mischievous Light, who would control the entities and would make them more powerful so they could easily kill the humans. After this, however, it seems like the god of doors just left, causing the celestials to run rampant. Guiding light still guiding the dead, curious light, instead of sealing off all external dimensions, became curious if the dead humans could get through the longer and harder dimensions, even rewarding them with starlight when they complete them. And finally, Mischievous Light would give the dead humans a choice to empower the entities, causing mischief indoors. However, during all of this, it seemed like one living human remained named Bob, who instead of just dying to Mischievous Light, chose to live the rest of his days in Jeff's shop, and as a payment, forged a key that can be used to unlock the rooms that he came from, which he would give to Jeff to sell to passerbys like us. Bob, because he was human, however, would eventually die to natural causes. And because El Goblino wouldn't understand how human death works, he would think he's still living, which would explain why he talks about Bob doing stuff with him, but also talks about how Bob isn't moving. Seek versus the Figure. They're both bosses we encounter, and we know they'll face off eventually because of what Seek did to Queen Grumble. So that had me asking who would win if they fought. Well, today, I measured all of their stats to see what would happen, and it will shock you. Let's start with their strengths. We know more about Seek, so I'll start with him. Seek's main powers are corruption and shapeshifting. For his corruption, we know his power is limited because in the mines he only corrupts the giggles, implying that he couldn't corrupt Queen Grumble instantly because clearly if he hates the giggles he would go to the source immediately. And beyond that, there are screech puddles in the Grumble nest, implying the Grumbles can kill screeches and overpower Seek. This means his corruption is limited by the power level and position of his opponents. This would explain how he corrupted Queen Grumble because he caught her off guard. So let's say his corruption powers are limited to medium level entity corruption, and with the right environments he can corrupt high-level entities, which already gives him a huge advantage. But that isn't it for Seek though. His shapeshifting is his main advantage. If we look at his chase scenes, we see that he has hands and eyes all across the hotel and mines, which made no sense until we saw his huge core body in his boss fight. Now for fairness sake, the figure will not be going against his main body, but only his little one. But the core body, however, still shows that Seek has nearly unlimited goo, meaning he has large shapeshifting capabilities. However, his shapeshifting is limited by his environment, meaning that if the figure isn't near a window or a pipe, then Seek can't use his goo hands and also wouldn't be able to make a certain room his domain. But that's it for Seek's main strengths. Let's get into the figure. For Figure, his main powers are pretty basic, with him simply being strong and able to hear any vibration nearby him. For his strength level, we know that he can tear us apart limb from limb in seconds, and his mouth can easily take off a human's head, which although useless against Seek, can prevent him from corrupting the figure through the mouth. Assuming that we are an average human, that would make these two strengths combined make Figure have at least superhuman strength. For endurance, we know he can withstand large hits because of when he drops down hundreds of feet at the end of floor 1 only to somehow climb back up and chase us down the elevator, both of which were at least 2-story falls if not more, which implies that the figure can most likely only be damaged by a powerful sharp object or something like fire. Past this, the figure also has his vibration sensing ability where he can sense nearly any vibration that is nearby him and any heavy vibrations away from him. This would mean that if Seek makes noises with his goo, then he can easily sense it and dodge it, making the figure nearly impossible to hit. Past this, Figure also has his spotlight, which let's just say can temporarily blind Seek or make him have to squint his eye. But that's it for their strengths. Let's get into their speed. For Seek, we know from his chase scenes he is as fast as us, placing him at average human speed. However, his extensions like arms or puddles of goo can move much faster but have limited maneuverability. We can see how fast they are by looking at how fast his hands hands come out in his hotel chase, which would put them at around superhuman to subsonic levels of speed. This would mean that Seek, although is slow, can use his goo like bullets against the figure if he needs to. But that's it for Seek. Let's look at the figure's speed. The figure is surprisingly a much more mixed bag. We know that from his encounters with us, he is generally way faster than us, which would place him at least peak human speed, which is what I would say until we look at what the devs told us about how Figure gets around doors. They said that the figure moves through secret pathways in the hotel and pipes in the mines. Now this wouldn't change much until we notice that for him to travel through these, he would have to be going faster than us in what would be a challenging environment for him to move in like the pipes. Assuming that this is his full speed, that would make the figure have almost subsonic level speed, making him just slightly faster than Seek's hands. But that's it for their speed. Let's get into their weaknesses. For Seek, he has almost no weaknesses, or at least none that we know of currently. His only weakness we know of is being led away from where his supposed domain would be, which from my guess has the outside or equivalent covered in his goo, which would explain why he doesn't just reform himself and chase us after we get to a certain limit in the hotel or mines. Let's say this limits Seek to around 5 to 7 doors worth of space for his domain in wherever he is currently at. However, because of how busted Seek is, and how we don't know if he can even die, let's say in the middle of his body he has a core that when broken will destroy all of Seek. But that's it for Seek. Let's get into the figure. We know that Figure has many weaknesses due to his power and his fleshy body. We know from the floor one ending that he is very weak to fire and literally will jump out of a window to avoid it. Past that, for his vibration ability, we also know that it makes him extremely angry when he hears too much, making him act more like an animal during the fight, giving Seek, who we can assume has human-level intelligence because of how he planned a sneak attack against Queen Grumble as soon as his main form was drained. Past this, however, unlike Seek, he would have vital organs, making a shot to the liver or the back of the head kill the figure easily. But that's it for their weaknesses. So let's have a quick recap before the fight. Seek has medium power corruption abilities and superhuman shapeshifting abilities with a domain of goo around a certain amount of doors, which let's just say is 5. He has average human speed with his extensions like hands or eyes being subsonic. His weakness for this fight will be a direct blow to his core in the middle of his body. For the figure, on the other hand, has superhuman base strength, endurance, and agility. He also has an in-between of superhuman and subsonic speed. He also has vibration sensing, which makes up for his blindness, making him extremely hard to hit. The figure's main weakness would be a direct hit to a vital organ. But with all of that out of the way, let's get into the fight. The figure is minding his business in the library when suddenly a glob of black goo forms in the middle of the library, forming Seek. Figure, hating the noise, runs at Seek and tries to hit it, only for Seek to submerge into the ground and spread his goo all across the library, creating an effective domain of his goo. Figure, however, with his vibration sensing ability, can sense where Seek is, charging at his core. However, because the figure is blind, he didn't notice that he was charging near a window, and Seek's hands burst out of the window and hit Figure across the library. Figure quickly gets up and charges over and over again at Seek's core, only to be cornered by being forced to dodge Seek's long-range hand attacks, causing the figure to get more and more angry. However, this rage would make the figure even faster, causing the figure to slowly be able to catch up to Seek. Bit by bit, the figure gets closer and closer, now tanking hits while dodging effortlessly, his ribcage being covered in blasts and his flesh now bleeding. After only a few minutes, he predicts Seek's movements and lands a devastating blow on him. However, at the last second, Seek hits the figure with one of his hands, causing the blow to only damage half of Seek's core. However, despite the setback, Seek now has the figure fully raged and focused on him, and when the figure tries to go for a finishing blow, he turns his hand into a spike and pierces the figure from behind, ending the fight by piercing the figure's heart, causing Seek to barely win the fight. But that's just my prediction. I could easily see how the figure could win by simply cornering Seek or fighting him in a room without windows or pipes that give Seek an advantage. However, Figure is a left-right goodnight type of character, with his only ability being his vibrations, while Seek has an extremely useful shape-shifting ability that he can use to his advantage by just hitting Figure from a longer range. But who do you guys think would win? Do you think I'm wrong, and explain why in the comments? The Figure. In Floor 1, he was the main antagonist, but in Floor 2, he strangely became a side character. This had me asking, why are the devs keeping him around? We know why Seek was kept from Floor 1 because of his large boss fight in Floor 2, but for Figure we have no idea. So I did some digging and found out that the figure will be corrupted, and I even found how Floor 3 will end. Let me explain first with Floor 2's entities. In Floor 2, we saw the Giggles, Grumbles, and the Gloom Bats. Let's focus on the Gloom Bats first. When the devs were making them, they strangely gave the figure a spotlight, which we know is for attracting them to him so he can eat them. But why add this detail if the figure was taking a backseat anyways? Well, the detail that the figure eats implies that the figure grows and develops similar to animals, which also implies that the spotlight he has would be from evolution to become better fit to the door's environment. Now, this might not seem important, but let's look at the only other organic creature indoors, the giggles and grumbles. We know that the giggles grow over time and become grumbles, but in between that stage, as other theorizers point out, they become the teenage giggles seek corrupted to become screeches. Now, you might be asking, why is this all important? Well, what if I told you the whole giggle to grumble life cycle might just be the same cycle that the figure goes through? Think about it. They're both organic creatures that need to eat to survive. They both are made out of weird flesh stuff, and they both evolved around floor 2. I believe that from all of this, the figure we see in game is effectively a teenager because he isn't too big, but also not too small. Now, you might be saying, why are there no kid figures or adult figures in floor 2 then? Well, to explain, we have to notice that the figure locked himself in the library as confirmed by the devs. At first, you might think that it was because of the noise and him wanting it to be quiet. But if that was the case, why is he still following us in floor 2? So from this, I concluded that he locked himself away because he was hiding from something. And I believe that that something is the grumbles. Think about it. They both evolved in the same area, and we know the grumbles would have to be eating something to still be living. So what if before the events of the game, the grumbles ate all of the figures, and the one we see indoors now was the last remaining figure left? This would also explain why the figure kills the giggles even if they don't make noise near him, because the figures and the grumbles would hate each other. But that had me asking, why doesn't Seek just corrupt the figure now? I mean, he corrupted Queen Grumble when she was outside of her natural environment, so why didn't he corrupt the figure in floor 1 or floor 2? Well, from what we know about the figure, we also can conclude that there's a possibility that at least one of the other figures would have escaped, and there's no other place for them to escape from floor 2 than up to the castle in floor 3. What if Seek isn't going for the library figure because his main goal was to get the adult figure in the castle? And to do that, he would have to corrupt Queen Grumble first so he could stand a chance. And when we lured Queen Grumble out of floor 2, he took his only chance to corrupt her, which is why we see him at the end of floor 2. But you might be asking, why doesn't Seek just corrupt the figure from the library? Well, to explain, let's look at the screeches. We can assume that the screeches are Seek corrupted giggles, but judging by how we don't see corrupted grumbles, these screeches don't grow up after they are corrupted. And because the figure isn't an adult yet, if Seek corrupted him, he would stay smaller, giving Seek much less power. But this made me question, why would Seek really want to corrupt an adult figure? And also, if the adult figures were in floor 2, why would they run away if they were more powerful than the grumbles? But past that, the adult figures would be way too big for the mines. So to answer these questions, I concluded that when the figures become adults, they leave the mines to go to the castle and the forest so they have more space. However, as the grumble population grew, they would start to eat the child figures, causing them to flee. These figures would go to the surface and wander around, eventually residing in the castle to find peace and quiet. However, because there was no food for the figures, their population died out slowly, with the only surviving figure being the one we see in the library. But because of how long this would take, Seek would become unaware that the figures have died out. So in floor 3, when he tries to find an adult figure to corrupt, he will only find a large skeleton in the middle of the castle. Seek, however, would not give up on the sight of this and would corrupt the skeleton and use it as the boss fight of floor 3 as a last-ditch effort to corrupt us. The adult figure will be unlike the regular figure we face off against and will act like a huge titan, destroying everything in its path to kill us. This would end with us killing the corrupted figure and maybe even Seek and then moving on to floor 4. But what do you guys? The gardens. We know that it's the next subfloor coming to doors, and it will be added in the next update, so I did some digging and found everything we know about the subfloor. So from the entities to the main boss, here's everything coming to the gardens. Let's start with the entities. So far, there has been a lot of leaks of entities that will be in the gardens, and the most interesting entity is called the groundskeeper, which is another name for a person who tends gardens. From the way he looks, and the fact that he is the only leaked humanoid entity for the gardens, he will probably act similar to Seek and will chase us around throughout the garden subfloor. However, unlike Seek, the groundskeeper will be much slower and will give us time to move through the gardens. This is because of the snares that we know will be in the gardens, which from my guess we will have to avoid while being chased down by him. But past this, from the fact that he's a groundskeeper, however, I believe that he will also be cultivating other entities in the subfloor as well. From my best guess, the entity that he will be cultivating will be this leaked entity known as Abraham. Now I say this because Abraham has a very similar texture and design to the figure, which, although sounds weird because we would be in a garden, makes sense. Think about it. The figure would have had to come from somewhere, and the figure in floor Floor 2 was revealed to have his spotlight solely to eat the gloom bats so he could survive, which implies that he originated and evolved from Floor 2, or maybe from a place connected to Floor 2, which in this case would be the gardens. Now you might be asking, where would Abraham come from? Well, I think that he would come from the flesh puddles that we've seen throughout doors. This would not only explain why we see them, but also why the figure is made out of flesh and bones, but seemingly has no blood. And from this, you might be asking why we don't see Abrahams near the other flesh piles we see indoors. Well, the simple answer is that the Abrahams would be grown by the groundskeeper in the garden subfloor. This, to me at least, makes much more sense to why we would see a garden subfloor in a mine that has weird, fleshy creatures coming from it, and would also explain many plot holes in doors, like where the figure originally comes from. From my guess, Abraham will act similar to the figure in the sense that he can't see, but because he is less developed, his vibration sensing abilities won't be as good, which will be compensated with multiple Abrahams, which would fit into the idea that the groundskeeper cultivated them. However, the groundskeeper won't just be cultivating Abrahams, because we know from the hints given to us by the secret courtyard room and the checkpoint rooms in the mines that a new vine entity will be coming in the gardens. This vine entity is what makes up the snare spikes, and is the same vines that we see cover the basement door in the courtyard and the chests in the mines, which both imply that the vines will be hostile toward us and will be stopping us from getting to the next doors in the subfloor. From my guess, the vine entity will be blocking certain parts of the subfloor that we will have to go to, and because we will be where the vines originated from, they will actively be moving and lashing out at us, similar to the seek hands in Floor 1. However, from my guess, the vines will be easily countered by the shears we see in the courtyard and rarely in chests. Past cutting down the vines, however, these shears will also be used to disarm another leaked entity, which is literally just a Venus flytrap. From my guess, the Venus flytrap will just hold loot in its mouth, and we will have to cut it off of the vines to get the loot. If we don't cut it off and try to grab it, however, the flytrap will shut on us, and although we will get the loot, we will take damage. This would also give us the option to get our shears back if they broke, which would keep the gardens not completely impossible. But that's it for the leaked entities, so let's get into what the floor will actually look like from what we know so far. I think that the gardens won't be like the back doors or the rooms, because it seems to actually be connected to the mines and not in a separate dimension like the other subfloors. I also think that the gardens will have 50 doors that will have their own counter similar to the rooms. But because we can get multiple skeleton keys indoors, from my best guess, the gardens will also be accessed by a skeleton key too, and the door to the gardens will be placed in one of the treasure rooms we see in Floor 2 or Jeff's shop. The actual gardens, however, will most likely have a similar effect to the courtyard in Floor 1 in the sense that there will be plants and specifically vines everywhere which will block our path multiple times. From my best guess, the entities will all have their specific sections in the gardens, with the groundskeeper acting similar to Seek in the sense that we will be chased by him in earlier doors, and the Abrahams being similar to the figure in the sense that there will just be one big dedicated room for them at the end of the floor. But that's really all that we know for the environment, so from all of this we can conclude exactly what the gardens will be like. When we enter the gardens, we will be greeted with large courtyards filled with greenery and vines that we will have to cut our way through until we get to door 10, where we will be chased down by the groundskeeper, which from my guess will be similar to the Seek chase except slightly slower, and will have curious light guiding us instead of guiding light because of the fact that we would be in a subfloor. We will have to avoid snares and vines trying to grab us and hold us still so the groundskeeper can get us. This chase scene would end at somewhere between door 25 to 40, and we will be met with a similar area to the greenhouse we see in the hotel with the PNGs constantly rushing us. However, when we get to door 50, we will be met with the Abrahams, who we will have to avoid while doing some kind of puzzle that has to do with the Venus flytraps and curious light hinting at where we need to go. After we escape the gardens, from my guess, we will be rewarded with a bunch of vines chests and maybe a bottle of starlight. But what do you guys think? Make sure to like and subscribe. The architects. We've interacted with guiding and curious, but strangely enough, we still haven't with the red architect yet. The most we see of them is in the three architects painting and as the modifiers logo. But I did some digging and found out that the red architect has been interacting with us the entire time, and that the red architect will control every entity by the end of doors. Let me explain first with the modifiers. In the modifiers page, we can notice two very important things. One, the logo is the red architect, implying that they are making the modifiers or are at least making some of them. And two, the modifiers have different categories, with the easiest being green, and the harder it gets, the more red it becomes. I point this out because if we look at the color of the red architect, we see that it is the same exact color as the hardest modifiers on each category, and the opposite of the red architect's color is the exact shade of green that's used for the helpful modifiers. This implies that the red architect is evil and wants to cause mischief to make sure we don't escape doors, which we can tell by its control over the floor floors in the modifiers and amount of entities. Weight amount of entities? If the red architect is the main evil in doors, then why don't they have control over the entities completely? Why are the entity modifiers seemingly controlled by the entities or doors itself? Well, the answer is in the one seek modifier, where we can see that seek's color is for some reason red and not black. Now, from what we know about the modifiers so far, I doubt that this is an unimportant detail from the devs, which means that the red architect has to have some sort of correlation to seek. Further proof of this is that seek glows red wherever he goes. We even see it in the damn seek boss fight in floor 2. Now, you might be asking, why is this important? Well, what if I told you that seek is being guided by the red architect similar to how we are being guided by guiding light? But unlike guiding light guiding us to getting out of doors, the red architect is guiding seek to overtake all of doors with his corruption powers. This would fit with the idea we see in the three architects painting, with the red architect being on the opposite side of guiding, implying that although they are similar to the extent of guiding their chosen being, they are the opposite in their motives. An example of this would be with the seek chase, where guiding light helps us escape seek and can even restrict seek with the crucifix, while the red architect guided seek to our location as implied with the room flooding red when he appears, and they also break him out of the crucifix, which is implied when it turns red after being used on seek. Now, you might be saying that when the other big entities get crucified, their sigil also turns red and they escape. Well, if we look back at the modifiers, we see that the red architect can only slightly interfere with the entities, like letting them spawn more often, which would mean that when the red architect breaks the entities out of guiding seal, they aren't overextending their power and is just helping the bigger singular entities to make sure they don't die yet. But why would the red architect help them not die? Well, the simple answer is what we saw at the end of floor 2, where seek corrupted Queen Grumble. This scene perfectly fits with the red architect helping the more powerful entities. What if the red architect is trying to get seek to corrupt every entity indoors, and in turn would help keep those entities alive so he can? This would explain why seek even corrupted Queen Grumble in the first place, to not only give the red architect more power over the Grumbles, but also a better chance at corrupting every other entity indoors, with the next one of those entities being the main boss of floor 3, King Grumble. I say this because of the fact that floor 3 will be in a castle, and a castle implies a king, and the only hint to a king we have indoors is Queen Grumble, which, because she is a queen, implies that there is most likely a king. It just makes sense. Now, you might be asking, why is this important? Well, a king implies subjects, and because subjects need protecting, they need an army, which means that if seek corrupts the king, Grumble, the red architect, gains control over the entire castle floor, which also means that they can start taking over all of doors. But there's one small problem with all of this. Why? Why is the red architect trying to take over doors by corrupting every entity? Well, after I replayed the whole game again and did some more research on the red architect, I found out that the red architect's name is actually Mischievous Light, as implied from the Doors Tower of Heroes crossover. Now, you might be asking, why is this important? Well, when I replayed the game, I realized that the lights are named after their purpose indoors. Guiding light is made to guide us. Curious light is curious on what we will do in the subfloors, and because he is curious, he has interacted with guiding and mischievous to an extent, as seen by the riffs in his voice line. She said to call that one Blitz, which, because guiding only says what we name the entities, mean that the she curious is referring to has to be mischievous. And from all of this, mischievous would want to cause mischief to make sure we can't escape, which would fit with her correlation to the entities, and especially seek. But wait, there's one small problem with this. Why is mischievous only taking over the entities now? I mean, we know that doors takes place in a limbo-like area because of the coded message on the guiding light statue, and the fact that we can revive, which would imply that other humans have gone through doors before. This is further backed up by El Goblino's voice lines and Bob, who we know was a human before he died. So why did Mischievous, and by extension seek, not just corrupt Queen Grumble and start her plan years ago? Well, if we look at the patterns of doors and curious light, we can get a pretty good idea on why she chose us to start her plan. We start off in a hotel, but then go to a technology-filled mine, and then a sewer, and then a castle. It doesn't make much sense unless we notice that every floor we are regressing in time. The hotel, as game theory points out, is from World War II. The mines and the sewers, which have functioning technology, are from the Industrial Revolution, and the castle is obviously from the Middle Ages. This is what I thought until I noticed this curious light line which says the back door is a very old place. No older than the hotel, but still old. Somewhat forgotten too. Some parts seem to be missing entirely. This implies that the hotel was the oldest floor of doors, which makes no sense if the floors are regressing in time, unless the technology and items on each floor weren't originally there. But wait, that's impossible. There's no way for them to get there, unless humans explored doors before we got to Limbo. Now hear me out, because this is is where the theory gets into highly speculative territory. What if the humans somehow got to doors by making a dimensional portal that linked to the hotel? I mean, it makes sense. We already see dimensional portals that we use to get to the rooms and from the back doors to the hotel. And past that, we know that magic exists in doors because of the crucifixes and many sigils that we see throughout the floors. So what if the humans made a dimensional portal by using sigils to the hotel, and through the hotel, they would industrialize the rest of doors? They would leave flashlights and lighters in drawers, and would make technology all across doors to live there. However, Mischievous Light would hate this because the humans would be ruining the purpose of doors as a place for dead souls to go through to get to the afterlife. So she would cause mischief to get the humans killed by making doors completely randomized and making the entities go after the humans much more often. The humans would begin to name these entities after what they do: eyes for the eyeball creature that they can't look at, rush for the creature that rushes them, figure for his humanoid appearance, and finally seek because he would constantly seek out the humans. But you might be asking why we don't see any more humans other than Bob's skeleton? Well, the answer is in the Grumble nest. If we look at the Grumble nest, we see that the technology is specifically tailored to keep entities out as implied by the many doors and seals. Now, you might be saying that this was for the Grumbles, but that doesn't make sense because the Grumbles inhabit locked-off places that are used to get in and out of the nest, which would make the technology just kill more humans than help them. Now, this raises a few questions, but they are all answered with the Seek chase before the Grumble nest. What if the humans were killed off by Mischievous Light, who would use Seek and guide him to kill almost every human, with the last few remaining humans locking themselves in the biggest room they could find, which we now know as the Grumble nest? But over time, these humans would starve to death, and because of the technology and otherworldly properties of doors, it isn't out of this world to say that they could have gotten cancer. And if we follow my Grumble theory that the Grumbles are teratoma tumors, we can assume that because of the fact they are in a different, nearly unknown dimension, the rest of the remaining humans would turn into the Grumbles, who would then inhabit the mines. This could also explain the theory of King Grumble, because from my guess, every floor had humans, and because of how big Seek is, he could chase them down no matter what floor the humans are on, causing them to have to hide in the biggest room they could find, resulting in them dealing with the same fate as the humans in the Grumble nest. However, even after the humans were turned into brainless monsters, Mischievous wouldn't forget what they did, and because the player is a dead human, Mischievous would become enraged when we entered doors. She would begin to devise a plan to make sure we can never escape doors no matter how many times Guiding Light lets us reset. That plan would be to corrupt every entity in doors and have complete control over all of doors, making it impossible to escape and keeping us there forever. However, I believe that Guiding Light chose us for a reason, and at the end of doors, when we defeated every monster Mischievous threw at us, she would go into her physical form, and us and Guiding Light would team up to take her down once and for all, setting the entities and the rest of doors free.